Hi, my name's Tyler Casey, and this is a podcast, Educators Society, and today's guest is Amy. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amy White. I'm mum to two children, one of those being neurodivergent with quite complex needs, and myself received a late autism diagnosis last year also, and I've also recently set up an independent consultancy business supporting parents in the SEND community.
Oh, Amy, that's brilliant. And I saw it was last week, wasn't it, that you qualified?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of different qualifications for a little bit of time now, and I've done the Autism Champion and Certified Licensed Trainer qualification alongside that as well, which means that I can deliver the Autism Champion training to places of employment, education, or to people who are looking for personal growth. Alongside that, I've been doing SEN Law, so I've completed level 2 now and halfway through level 3, which is the highest one, just so although I've got 11 years lived experience of navigating the system and advocating for my son, by doing that, I realised how much legislation was out there to protect our children that so many parents aren't aware about. And if I hadn't have done that digging that I did, Jack would still be left rotting without a school placement. Yeah. So it's something that I really want to advocate about as well is, a lot of these local authorities portray to parents that their policies and procedures are the gospel. And actually, no, there is many laws out there within the Children and Families Act in particular that supersede these policies and procedures. And it's not until you're educated in that you realise how gaslighted you can actually be as a parent by these local authorities. And that is very much to the detriment of your child as well. So it's, for me, it's having that voice and showing other parents the way, because no child should be left behind. Every child has a right to thrive.
Absolutely, they do, Amy, yeah. Can I just ask you then, from your opinion or even experience, why do you think local authorities gaslight parents and say all of the things that they say that actually isn't always correct when all of this legislation's in place? Because legislation is supposed to be in place to protect children, adults, etc. And if that's in place but it's not being followed by local authorities, by government bodies, what is the point of it being there? Why are they allowed to get away with it?
And this is one thing as well. So they do it because it's a delay tactic, and it all comes down to funding. Because parents that end up taking their cases to tribunal, 98% go in parent favour. Last year alone, £60 million of government funding was wasted on tribunals. They should not have gone to tribunal because they went in parent favour. And so I think a lot of it comes down to, it is funding issues because they're underfunded, and they know that if it goes to appeal, they know that the parent's going to win, but it ends up coming out of another pot. It's that delay tactic of, it takes at least a year for a tribunal to come round. So that's a year they haven't got to pay out. And that is the definitive point of it. It's because if it came down to the welfare and the rights of the child, there would be no tribunals for parents, because children would be getting what they're entitled to. And it comes down to places as well. There's not enough places. And I know we're going to speak about it, but obviously there's been that complete uproar recently of the Warwickshire comments from the councillors, obviously, which disgusting. There's no other way to describe it. And as a SEN parent and as a professional, you sit there and you think, how are these uneducated people allowed to be in these positions? And I just think there needs to be accountability. And actually, I think there should be some form of reprimand to the local authorities when they are putting families through this. And some families they'll take it to judicial review, and they'll seek compensation. Others are just so relieved to finally get what their child needs that they can't bear the thought of any more fighting, which I get it, because fighting for Jack nearly broke me. But they then walk away, and the pattern continues because there's no accountability. There needs to be something in place to stop this from happening, because as you rightfully said, there are laws there for a reason. So why do they think it's acceptable to be able to not follow this guidance? It's frustrating, very frustrating. And a lot of money would be saved if this wasn't happening. And that money could be money to then fund the places that are needed, like, or, additional schools, resource spaces. If they actually put that money into that instead, we wouldn't have this admissions issue in the first place.
No.
It's a very, very broken system that it's not an overnight fix, but something needs to happen. And, going back to those counsellors, some of the comments were, oh, we didn't have this when we were younger. No, you did. You did. You think back to the children that you went to school with that dropped out or had severe mental health issues or were known as the naughty child or the emotional child. These are the children that are now adults receiving late diagnosis. And so it's always been there. It's just that awareness and growth is far much more apparent and is talked about. And, social media has a huge play in that. But I don't think there would be nowhere near as much awareness as there is if it wasn't for social media. So for all its downfall sometimes with social media, it has a lot of good to it too if it's used in the right format.
Yeah, I agree completely there. Just going back a little bit on what you said in regards to the law, when I did some research about children and even children's protected characteristics, they had 5 protected characteristics. The third one on the list was educational. And that's the government's excuse and reason why when parents take their kids out during term time for holidays, they see that the parent is neglecting their child's educational needs. But then when a government or a local authority then isn't funding a child's educational needs as they should, and as the law is created to protect them, and they're using the excuse, well, it's funding. Well, where else does the government get money from to do all what they want to do? Refurbish offices. Gillian Keegan had her office refurbished.
34 million pounds on her office refurbishment. And that's the definitive point that you've raised there. It's the double standards, because you've got parents being fined for taking their children out for a week's holiday, which, in my opinion, life experiences are just as important. Yet you've got local authorities thinking it's acceptable for children to be out of school for years. I've got people contacting me that their children haven't been able to attend school for over a year due to the fact that there's no suitable provisional placement or the fact that the local authority are refusing to fund it. Where's the accountability on their part? Yet a parent takes their child on holiday for a week, you're going to get fined for that. The double standards is just, it leaves me speechless. It really does.
Yeah, it is all completely double standard, absolutely. And just what you were saying, sorry, did you say 34 million was spent on Gillian Keegan's office?
Yeah. And then if you think that 34 million pounds spent on an office refurbishment, and then 60 million pounds just last year alone wasted on tribunals, that's nearly 100 million pounds that could have been put back into the education system to provide all of those children out of education with a suitable education. So and the thing is, when they sit there and say, the government can say, oh, it's funding. When, in the height of COVID, when a government can erect 7 hospitals within 2 weeks, which was amazing, and I'm not taking that away from anybody, it was incredible, it saved lives, don't then sit there and tell me that you can't erect different schools and establishments to support these children who are out of education, because you can. It's just you're choosing not to because you don't see it as a warranted investment. They think children with additional needs aren't a warranted investment. And I think that's the harsh reality, when actually, when you look at a lot of these children who have special educational needs, they are very bright children. They just need the environment adaptations. And I say that with a lot, with being autistic myself and my son being autistic, we are not disabled by our autism. We are disabled by our environments. So if I'm in an environment that suits my needs, nice lighting, not overstimulating me with noises, my clothes are comfortable, I'm good. I'm regulated. I can achieve anything. You put me in a busy, hot room with humming in the background, tight, restricted clothes, I'm stressed and I'm not going to be taking in anything. And that's what it comes down to. If you get the environment right for these children, they will thrive. And they are not, they're all, autism isn't a learning disability, and it's not a mental health condition. It's a different way of thinking. And that's what people need to understand. Now, yes, you can get co-occurring conditions with autism, that global development delay, anxiety, is ADHD, there's lots of co-occurring conditions. but you can also get that being neurotypical. You can be neurotypical and have global development delay. So it's eradicating that stigma that autism is a learning disability, because it's not. It's a different way of learning. And we're only disabled by that because we're 9 times out of 10 in the wrong environment. And I think it's just educating people on that.
Yeah. That's a very, very powerful statement you've just said there. And I really, really do appreciate how you've put that. I did on a previous podcast have a conversation with some girls from America, and they were asking about on applications, it asks if you're disabled or if you consider yourself to have a disability. And of course, because of my hearing loss and being neurodiverse myself, it is considered to have a disability, so I have to write yes by law. But then if you notice to it, underneath it says, do you consider yourself disabled? I don't know if you've ever come across that, but I have. And I tick no, I don't consider myself disabled, because albeit society around me and my assessments say that I have learning disabilities, but I don't feel like I do. I mean, I do consider myself to be very intelligent and very bright. I've achieved a lot more than what most do at even the age that I'm at. But I did struggle through school, and I did struggle through everything else. But that was because of the lack of the support. That wasn't because of my abilities to do these things. And
no, a lot of it comes down to environment. It really, really does. And that was the same with Jack. Being in a mainstream school, it was the environment that completely disabled him. And because of that, he's a very, very bright child, but he switched off. He just went into shutdown mode because that was the only way he could survive being in that environment. So he was no longer learning. Now he's in an independent specialist school, and the environment is completely suitable to his needs. He's coming home, the light's back on in his eyes. He's coming home, he's telling us about his day, he's retaining information again. And he has very severe ADHD. He has combined type ADHD, but is predominantly crippled by inattention. When they did his QB test, you've got 100% being the highest scale in terms of inattentiveness. And she was like, he couldn't have scored any higher. He was 100% and could have actually probably gone over into his own bracket. Yet if you engage him about his interest, his attention span's incredible. So it's learning how to work with that. So, an uneducated person could look at that and say, well, he's not going to learn anything because he's got an attention span of 15 seconds. A person who really gets to know about neurodiversity will say, yeah, okay, so he's got an attention span of about 15 seconds because is that around things that he's not interested in? What about if we incorporate his special interest into that learning? Are we going to get more from him? Yes, you are.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. It's a different way of learning. So it's not that he can't. It's just you've got to find the way to do it. And again, that's not available in a mainstream school because the system is set up to teach 30 children the same way. That when I talk to people about Jack's independent school, and it offers the national curriculum, so he's still getting his core standard subjects, but they do a lot of vocational and life skills too. They do cooking, they do forest school, they go to the stables. There's a lot of enrichment to put in there to build up that self-esteem. And so many people are like, every school should be doing this, and I'm like, because you know what, there's children in school who are neurotypical, but they are just not academic, yet they could be so creative. They could be a musician, they could be a carpenter, they could be an interior designer. But because they don't fit that criteria in the system, they spend their whole childhood believing that they're not capable of anything. Where actually, if we incorporated into our education system vocational life skills, they would grow up believing in themselves, thinking, well, that's okay that I don't understand maths, but actually I'm great at creating something. You could give me a flat pack and I'll build it. I couldn't do that, but there are some children that can, and I think that's the definitive point. There are even children out there without special educational needs that leave school feeling that they can't achieve anything because they didn't fit into that square box, and it's really sad.
Absolutely, Amy, because I feel like the schooling system is just so old. It's like back Victorian times. It's not changed. Yeah, exactly. And if you don't fit down this path, if you're off this path, then you're just left to it. It doesn't matter if you're an overachiever or if you're an underachiever. If you're not in this bracket where they're teaching these 30 children, you get left out. And it's funny what you should say in regards to Jack's intellect. In every adult that I know with autism, in every career that they're in, there is not one person around them that knows more about their job than them. And these are people that have left school with A stars, they've been to universities, they've got degrees, they've flown through everything academically. But you, as the people that I know that are in this career, they're in it because they love it, they're passionate about it, they live, breathe, eat, sleep, they know everything about it. But yet you've got all these people that I think you'd expect because they've got all of the... Exactly, yeah. You'd expect because they're smart on paper and they've got all these qualifications and letters after the names and whatever else. But actually, as a matter of fact, they probably know just as much as what everybody else who learned what they learned would know. But somebody who's autistic, they know everything. What they don't know about the job, you don't need to know. It's nothing to do with the job. Like, they just know everything.
I know. And, you know, I think the government are so out of touch with what there needs to be. I mean, look at the recent campaign of the attendance. I mean, if that is an out of touch message, I don't know what is. You know, that's basically saying to a child, it doesn't matter how much you're suffering, you need to go to school, otherwise you're failing. And I just think, really, in this day and age, come on. I mean, what actually we'd have a lot more respect for is if they ran a campaign about recognising children's mental health and the changes that need to go on there. You know, for me, like with Jack, when advocating for his placement, you know, the real core thing for me was you get one life. It's not a dress rehearsal. And I don't want either of my children spending an adulthood recovering from a childhood that it didn't need to be that way, you know? And it got to that point with Jack, you know, he's just turned 11 now. And it was at that point where it's make or break now. And we'd tried for 6 years to make mainstream work in so many different ways. You know, we'd had an HCP in its reception year. You know, we'd done part-time timetables. We moved to a smaller village school with a smaller intake and secured a full-time one-to-one. And it's just still not fit for purpose. And when you're 10-year-old at the time, then, you know, the start of year 6 was the catalyst. And when he's then sat there at midnight crying to me that he doesn't think he's going to survive another year, he thinks the stress of school is going to kill him, that's a big wow moment. And it was at that moment when I made the decision that you're not going back to mainstream. I'm not doing this to you, because I thought I'm not going to have my child be another failed statistic. And then 3 weeks later, he was hospitalised, because basically what transpired from that was, so Jack has Tourette's as well. And he's always had very subtle minor tics, like throat clearing, eye blinking. Again, if you didn't know and you weren't educated in it, you probably wouldn't pay much attention to it. So about 3 weeks after pulling him out of school, he developed this really severe full body tic. Like, I'm talking like completely paralysed him and would take him to the floor. And when they first started happening, he was probably having a dozen a day. And I remember calling the doctors and his GP was off. So I called 111, a little bit concerned, and they were like, you know, did observations over the phone. And, you know, when they weren't happening, he was fine in himself. So they'd look, you know, keep an eye on him. If anything else happens, you know, come back to us. Well, a couple of days later, they were awful. They were literally one after the other. There was no respite. So we called back up 111, and they were like, you know what, we're going to send out a response team to come and have a look at him, because at this point it was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and I was like, literally his legs were giving way, and I'm thinking, is there more to this? This is awful. You know, paramedics literally turned up within minutes, and did observations on him, and they were sort of skyrocketing, and they were like, look, we're not going to leave him this, because obviously as well, from a sensory perspective, they were really distressing for him. And then having, you know, strangers coming into the house, hooking up wires and stuff, you know, that's an autistic person's nightmare. So we ended up being taken into A&E, and they just were not subsiding. and we were then transferred to a ward, and they did all blood tests, to see if there was any infection. They were all coming back clear. And then the consultant said to him, and it was almost like, why didn't any of us ask this before? Said, Jack, when these tics are happening, is there anything going on in your mind? And I'll never forget it for as long as I live. He said, I'm getting flashbacks of school.
Oh,
and
my word.
Then he started reeling off about 6 years worth of memories, things that had happened in reception, year 1, stuff that I'd even forgotten about, that I was just like, oh my God. And basically it transpired that it was PTSD. And they said, when a soldier is at war, they're in fight or flight mode. It's not until they're taken out of that war zone and they then have time to process what they've been through that the body reacts to it. And he said, this is what's happening. It's triggered because you've now removed him from the war zone. He's able to no longer be in fight or flight mode, but his body is reacting to that. And the only way they ended up being able to under control was by prescribing diazepam, which is not something you give lightly to a 10-year-old. It was the only thing that ended up giving him some respite. And then we basically had to ride the storm. And it took about a good 2 months for them to really subside. And I actually did a lot of research and found out that magnesium is really good for blood tics and muscle.
Yeah.
Incorporated that into his daily routine, and it's made a huge impact. And so he still tics every day, a lot more than what he used to. And I think it will take a long time for that to subside and for him to recover. But if that doesn't put into perspective how much the system needs to change, then I don't know what can. And I'm just really, for me, although it was, and that's the thing, a child shouldn't have to break for the system to listen. And as much as it was awful that he went through that, I believe that is the only reason we ended up, well, not the only reason, I very much knew all the legislation that was in place, but I think it very much weighted him getting the provision that he's now in. And that a child shouldn't have to go to that level of broken for a system to say, okay, we'll intervene now and we'll put you in a setting that's going to meet your needs. That's wrong. And no other I don't want any other child to ever have to go through that.
No. I mean, Amy, I just feel sickened for your Jack, because one, I don't doubt for a single second as you were describing that to me sounded like PTSD anyway. But then as well, an autistic child, not really understanding yourself what's going on, and then going through that. I mean, I just feel sickened for him. But I do sympathise with him in the sense of, I suppose I was quite lucky. I had a really, really positive primary school experience where I was very, very supported. But then my high school experience, I was anything but supported. I was very much neglected, very much left up to my own devices, forgotten about, I think. I think some of the teachers might have seen me as a bit of a difficult or problematic student. I just didn't really fit in. Kids called me names. Teachers also then called me names, which then other kids then would follow on. So, and it's funny because even after I left high school, I had to have counselling, just because of how bad it affected me. 5 years of my life, it affected me.
That's such a core part. The ages of sort of 11 to 16. You've got hormones kicking in. It's probably one of the difficult parts of life that you'll go through. And for me as well, I always said that a mainstream secondary school would have eaten Jack alive. He would never have coped with changing classrooms every hour, a different teacher every hour, the number of children that are there. And socially, it's brutal. It is brutal, secondary school. And I remember when I was at secondary school, and we're talking like late 90s, early noughties, there was no social media then. So if you got a hard time at secondary, which I did, you at least know at 3 o'clock the bell would ring, you'd go home and you'd be left alone and you'd get some respite. Where nowadays, I mean, Jack's not allowed social media accounts. He has a little YouTube thing to do his video gaming, and that's it. Because, for me, until he's of an age where he can really sort of understand it, he's too vulnerable. But there are children out there that just get absolutely terrorised all day at school, and then they leave school and it's relentless because they're then terrorised through social media platforms. So it's a really difficult time for any child, let alone one of differences.
Absolutely. I mean, Amy, I think, again, I could not agree with more what you're saying there. And I think that you did the absolutely right thing with Jack to fight as much as what you did. And I know every parent does the best for the child. But I really, really do feel sick and feel. I'm not an SEN parent, but what toll does that have though on your mental health though? Because nobody wants to see the child go through that.
No, it got to the point. I mean, when I was in the midst of fighting for him, it absolutely consumed every piece of me. And I've got other children. I've got my daughter, I've got my stepson, obviously I've got my husband, and of course they still mattered, and I was there for them. But every thought I had was for, I've got to get this right. I've got to get him in this school because my child he deserves this. And then at the end, like when I got the call about 3 days before Christmas, to say that the local authority had conceded and they agreed the specialist provision and for my parental choice. And I just fell to my knees sobbing, like just, it almost didn't feel real. Like, and I feel I've definitely experienced trauma from it. I still don't think I've allowed myself to process it, because I said at one point, I remember saying to my husband at one point, like all my eyes were twitching from the stress. And I remember saying to my husband, I'm going to have a stroke. I said to him, I literally feel like I'm going to have a stroke. I'm that stressed. Like I couldn't think of anything else. Like it just completely and utterly consumed me. Because being autistic myself as well, it become a hyper focus. So it's all I could think about. Literally all I could think about. You know, it absolutely was not a pleasant experience. It's not anything I would wish on anybody. And I think that's why it's led me to where I am now, to setting up an independent consultancy to guide other parents on that journey, because I did that all by myself. Yes, I had the support of my husband and my family. They were there to emotionally support me, but it was me who just went into this complete rabbit hole of wanting to find out all the different legislations. And the more I was finding out, the more I was like, this is wrong. You know, nobody should have to do this. And really want to be a voice for that, because it needs to change. It really does. And it's, you know, people say, oh, it's a snowflake generation. No, it's not. No, it's actually, it's recognising your child's needs. There are so many people of my generation and before who have severe mental health conditions because they were completely unsupported, completely unrecognised. And that's, you know, and that's the difference that this generation want to make, is we don't want our children, like I said earlier, to spend their adulthood recovering from a childhood. So it's not about raising children to think that they're, you know, oh, they're too precious to this and that. It's not. I mean, I'm a firm but fair parent. I'm very much with my children, you know, I'm your parent first before I'm your friend. You know, I'm not what you'd call, you know, I'm not a snowflake. Well, you know, if my child wants to go and jump off the sofa and draw up my walls, they can, because they're expressing themselves. That's not me. You know, I'd be like, no, we're going to respect and we're going to say our, you know, our P's and Q's. But at the same time, I'm very aware of me. And advocate for that.
No, I agree with you again, and take it as well from somebody as well who, of course, a lot older than your Jack, but I've been there, done that, and I had years of counselling after that, and I do not want no child to go through that. Children shouldn't go through that, because life's hard enough as it is anyway.
Prevention's better than cure, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt, it is. I completely agree.
Because what will happen is they're trying to save money in the education system, but actually it's only going to end up costing them more money in the future when all these children are going to require therapy to get over it.
Exactly. And from my perspective as well, we all know the government's trying to push for more disabled people to be in the workplace, but without actually fully supporting that, I believe. Anyway, they don't fully support it. They expect people to go into the workplace without support like they need. But my frustration lies with the fact that they're not even supporting these children through school first. And then they're trying to push them into jobs that, when they've had such an awful traumatic time in school, how are they going to survive in the working world? Sometimes workplaces are hard. We all have crap days at work. So if you've been through crap years at school, how are you going to manage in a week in a workplace around so many different people from so many different generations? I work with people who even still to this day, they'll say to me stuff like, oh, well, this didn't exist when I was younger. They tell me I'm too young to be deaf and all that crap. It's like, listen, it just is what it is. I tell them as well. It is painful, yeah. I tell them though, I say, listen, gay marriage didn't exist when you were a kid. Does that mean that that's wrong? Oh my word, are you serious? You know, doesn't mean just because something didn't exist doesn't mean that it wasn't right. Doesn't mean it, you know, that it's not real. It is real. Do you know what I mean? And these things
it was there, it just wasn't recognised. And it's like, I think there's some sort of saying where it says, oh, I think Mount Everest wasn't discovered until like, I don't quote me on the year, but I want to say I swear I've read it somewhere like the 1940s, but it was always there. It just wasn't discovered, you know, and that's with this, it's just we're evolving and we're understanding. But yeah, you know, going like onto the work situation, I think I read something the other week where it said like only 20, it was either 22 or 26% of autistic people are in employment, and that is because reasonable adjustments are not in place. And this is why I did the Autism Champion training, because to go into these places of work to say, actually, if you have this level of understanding and you make these reasonable adjustments, neurodiverse people are actually great employees. You'll get so much from them. It's just getting people to understand that awareness, isn't it?
It really is. So can I just ask, Amy, though, with you having then a late diagnosis, how was your employers with your late diagnosis, if you don't mind me asking?
No, it's fine. So they've been really good. It's quite a small firm that I work for, and the HR, I've only spoken really to the HR manager there, and I said, you know, I want to make you guys aware, and she was just like, you know, can you educate me on this a little bit? Like, what does it mean? And I said to her,
brilliant. I'm glad that she asked. I've never heard somebody say that before. It's all shut down.
No, I know, and I, you know, like, because part of me is thinking, is she asking because she doesn't believe me? Like, what do I have to sell? Do I have to sell my diagnosis here? It was, you know, I just said to her, you know, it's just a case of sudden changes to the routine can really affect me. I have a real sense for justice, so I think if something's wrong, I won't let it go. And I work for a law firm, so I suppose that's not really a bad thing. I'm very literal in my way of thinking. So, you know, if you ask me, does your outfit look nice? And it doesn't, well, I'm going to tell you it doesn't. And I'm not saying that to be rude. You know, I've learned as a female autistic, we're very good at masking and understanding how we should present ourselves in social situations. So I will always obviously consider people's feelings, but in terms of discussions, sometimes I can be quite blunt. And I'm not meaning to be rude. And I said as well, I do have like sometimes I have like a processing delay. Like I was saying to you earlier, that I'll have all the ideas up here and I can articulate it wonderfully in my head. But then trying to get that from here to here, there can sometimes be a real barrier. Not when I'm talking about my special interest, which you may have realised is about neurodiversity. I can speak about that very fluidly. But if I'm trying to explain something, I think an example I gave to her was when Jack was in mainstream school and he would have homework, and it is so different to how when I was at school. And let's say it was like trigraphs and digraphs and these conjunctions, and I'm thinking, what the hell is this? This is not what I've learned. So obviously I'd turn to Google and I would read what it would say on Google, and I would fully understand what it said, but I could then not reinterpret that to him. There was like that real processing barrier. So it's like I knew exactly what it meant, I just couldn't explain it. And so I'd feel really frustrated internally, but obviously trying to help my child with his homework, I'd be like, this is really difficult. Yeah. So in that sense, and it's just them understanding, you know, like when there's changes within the workplace and stuff, or, you know, we've had a lot of upheaval over the last few months as a department, that does unsettle me. But I just have to allow myself that time to process it. And I'm very good at sort of therapizing myself, if that's even a word, where I'll be like, you know, this is going to overwhelm you. You know, it's just a fit and it's going to pass. So let's just ride through it. And just sort of coast through. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But I think when I'm comfortable somewhere, it's fine.
Oh, that's really good, is that, Amy? If you want to talk a bit about your work then with SEN Reform.
So I went to the Oxford protest. I was one of the volunteers there. It was an amazing day. I did an interview for ITV and BBC and ended up on like the 6 o'clock news, which completely spun my children out. Like, what are you doing? You know, it's an amazing cause, and I think it's a movement that has very much brought the SEN community together. And I think there was a real, you know, as a SEN parent, you can feel in your own community, you can feel really lonely unless you find that fellow SEN parent within your community or your child's school. You know, it's a very isolating journey when your child isn't being invited for play dates, isn't being invited to parties. The parents in the playground aren't initially sort of engaging with you. And so you kind of you get a sense of how your child is feeling, because you're thinking, God, I feel isolated. How must you feel? And I think there is a lot of support in terms of social networking groups and stuff, but to actually find a nationwide movement that you think, I'm not the only one. Like, everybody, you know, is going through this and understands. It just makes that journey feel a little bit less alone, and it just gives you that more of an inner fight to know that you've got an army behind you. Because that's one thing I will say about the SEN community, like on my platform, is I have connected with some of the most amazing mums that if it wasn't for that platform, I would never have got to know. You draw from each other's strengths and experiences, and you finally feel like you're part of something, and that you know that if you put something out on that social media platform, you get the odd troll, but you know what, you just starve them of oxygen. I mean, touch wood, I'm very lucky that I haven't personally really had a lot of that. But if there have been comments on certain things that I've shared or content that I've created, and they're not nice comments, I just remove and block instantly, because I'm not going to respond and I'm not going to react and give you the oxygen that you want from that. So when you take that side of it out, because there are, you know, I follow a lot of big platforms on there too who do an amazing job at advocating for their children, and some of the comments they get are disgusting, and you just think, but the community then sees that and rallies around that person and says, we're not having this. Good always outweighs the bad. And I think going back to the SEN Reform movement, I think it's been incredible what the women that front that campaign have done an exceptional job to grow it in the way that they have and get the awareness. Because prior to that movement really kicking off last summer, it was last June, where they had the first protest in London, it was never really talked about, the SEN system. It was never really a lot of parents felt, because there hadn't been that awareness, a lot of parents felt that it was only their child that was being let down by the education system. And then this movement, I mean, Reform's been around for years. We get that. It's a movement that's been around for years, but it's only been in the last 10 months that it's really ignited and gone onto social media platforms and within news outlets. And it's at that point that you think, I'm not alone. And that actually we all stand together, we can make a change. And I think that's why, you know, you've got so many different advocates out there that collaboratively can make this change happen, which is only going to pave the way for the next generation, because it's not going to go away. Neurodiversity isn't going to go away. You know, it's always going to be there. It's always been there, and it's always going to be there. But what we need is to create a system that supports that and recognises it. And I think that is an exceptional job. Whether it's not an overnight fix, no, it's going to take years. But just having that level of awareness out there already makes that change.
Yeah, again, I couldn't agree more with you there, Amy. And I do also just want to applaud you and all of the SEN mums, because people like me, myself, and then others alike, we've kind of been there, done that. We don't want history to repeat itself. But actually, fundamentally, what you and the other SEN mums are doing by going down to Parliament, by speaking to the MPs, you guys are the ones, though, that are really, you're making this change already. You're the ones that are making this recognised by MPs, by the people who actually fundamentally make these decisions. My intention was really just to set an example to anybody who is younger to know, oh, you can still be something, X, Y, and Z. When actually you guys are really going even further. And honestly, I just applaud you all. My heart goes out to you as a mother myself, and I just feel sicker for you all, the fact that you're having to fight for your child's right.
You shouldn't have to fight. Yeah, you shouldn't have to fight for their basic rights. But the one thing that I think that a lot of SEN parents will always say is, I mean, I know it's something that I live by, is I want my children to know that I fought for them. You know, that say, do you know what? Mum fought for me. And I know that if I go to mum and I tell her this, you know, she's going to try and make a change. And I've always said that, you know, Jack was very aware within reason of what I was doing for him, because I wanted him to know that his voice mattered. I wanted him to know that I listened. And I used to say to him, I won't always be able to fix everything, but I'll try. I'll certainly try. And so I want him to grow up knowing, you know, mum always listened, mum always tried. And I always got his back, or always got his back. But the thing is, there's no love like a mother's love, is it? No one does. I always say no one does better research than a worried mum. We're like the MI5. Like, if we're worried about something, we're going in deep and we are going to find out. And I think that is what makes SEN mums and dads, because there are dads out there doing such an incredible job as well, advocating, that we do. You know, it's, you live and breathe for your child's happiness. And I always say that you're only as happy, so I want this to make sense. So you're only as happy as your unhappiest child. So if my child is heartbroken and sad, I'm not happy. I'm not thriving because my child, you know, it becomes that impact, doesn't it? So I think
it really does. Yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much, honestly, for your time today.
It's been lovely.
I do really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate you asking me to come on and talk about it, because I could literally talk about it for hours. Like, my husband's like, how long are you going to be on there? Because you're going to start talking about your special interest. You're going to be on there hours, aren't you? And I was like,
yeah, you and me both. So even if you ever want to drop me a text, or you're free for chat, and if you ever want to talk about special interests, like neurodiversity too is my special interest, because it's not spoke about enough and it needs to be. We need to make it accepted, and the only way to do that is by talking about it.
And communicating.
Exactly. Me and my daughter's neurotypical. She's smarter than I am. But me and her both talk about it, and she's going, you know, can children do this, Mummy? Can children do that? And I'm just like, yes, darling. I says, you know, you can do whatever you want to do, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I love talking about it too. So thank you though, so much though, Amy, for your time today.
You're welcome. No, it's been great. It's been lovely. And I will no doubt catch up with you very soon.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, well, thanks so much, Amy. I'll see you soon.
No worries. Take care.